Welcome to episode 30 of the International Web Effectiveness Podcast, where Bill Hunt and I, Bill Scully, focus on the strategies and techniques necessary to improve your web presence and manage your global websites. In episode 29, we discussed the need for a VP of Answers and/or an Answers management program and strategy. In this episode, we want to talk about our recent trip to New York City for the Google Search Central event. Hey, Bill, how's it going?
Doing well, and you?
Good. Yeah, so we both got to go, as well as Motoko. That was nice. I didn't get a lot of shocking information from it, but I thought it was good, and I thought that they were tailoring a lot of the content to the vast majority of people that might be in digital marketing and SEO. What did you think about it?
I mean, in the first 15 minutes, I thought, well, I just wasted a day. It's never a waste because you get to see people you haven't seen in a while, and it's good. And yeah, I thought it was a good event. It's always good when we can get people in front of Google and they'll answer your questions. That's what's nice. There was really nothing off limits. There was questions, obviously, they weren't necessarily going to answer. Some they skirted around, but it was good. I mean, we had search relations people, search their, they're called the search outreach or support team, the partners people, a lot of discussion AI. So I thought that was good. To me, the big theme, at first I was a little scared. I think I mentioned this to you. I'm like, oh, wow. John Mueller started doing a what is search and how does it work? And I'm like, you've got a room full of some of the top SEOs in the world. But as you said, it's a little bit for everybody, and that's how they teed it up. But yeah, I thought there was two takeaways for me, two big ones. One, AI answers, AIO, just AI was the big thing. And then the second one we'll talk about, in a few minutes is evolution. I probably heard that word evolution 100 times. I bet if we took the transcript and did a search, it would be in there at least 100 times. So I think those were the two things. I agree with you. There was nothing earth-shattering. The article that we're putting up for it, I think we do call out some interesting things. There was a couple sound bites, which we'll talk about as we go deeper. But yeah, it was great. They did take care of us, wrangling a lot of people. It was the first time I had ever been in that building, and it was a really nice building. So yeah, I think it was definitely worth the time investment to go there.
Yeah. And like you said, getting access to people. I actually, when at the end I had told you I was going to go say hi to somebody, I ended up speaking to Daniel Weissenberg, the Search Console guy, trying to figure out issues with image indexing for schema. And so interesting information. There's really not a good way to confirm images are indexed. Even if you use the SRC semicolon and the image URL, that will show you images. You can click down through it and eventually see what the image URL is. If it's the image URL, it's indexed. If it's not, you don't know if the image you're looking for is indexed or not. But then he turned me on to Ryan Levering. He was the guy with the schema shirt on. Do you remember that? Mm-hmm. At the end there? So really interesting information. We've been battling thumbnails for the organic results, and we've been trying to deal with that with the schema, and they don't actually use schema for those images.
Interesting.
So I had a couple questions for him. So first I said, would schema images that were not on the page get crawled? So, in schema, you put a URL, but it's not a link. It's just text inside the schema block, right? And he said, eventually they'll get to it. It could take time, but he wasn't really sure about the go, no-go decisions for indexing. And what he said, it's best to use a schema image URL visible on the page. The next best thing would be to have an image map to help speed up and crawl for the indexation.
An image XML sitemap.
Yeah. Or an XML sitemap. The schema image URLs are only used for features. For example, the one by one image in the schema would be used for the mobile carousel. So mobile carousels are now one by one. They used to use the schema images for the original organic thumbnail, but they stopped doing that. And he thinks that they probably never documented that change. So maybe you'll
That's
see an
interesting.
update as a result of our conversation. So, like, I left my house at probably 5:30 and got home at 10, and those answers were worth my trip.
That's good. Yeah, it's good. I mean, that's exactly it, right? Because
Yeah.
if it's not documented anywhere, and who do you ask, right? There's
Yeah.
no better person, and you're not asking anything that's necessarily privileged. And I think, they made, I mean, in the first 10 minutes when we were let in, the number of people that were asking specific questions about their site to John Mueller and he's like, look, I can't tell you your site. I'm not looking at it, but I can give you generalized feedback based on. And I think that's a perfect question. And I think we should probably include that in our meetup notes because I mean those are the things. That's gold.
Yeah.
When they can say maybe we are, maybe we are, at least they point you in the right direction. And then I think telling you, that thing. I mean, it's that okay. We're going to take this, and then we're going to get this, and or even if they scratched their head and said, I don't think we can do that, then you know that you're not going crazy because you've spent a lot of time trying to ferret this out.
Mm-hmm.
Um, the one thing, there was two things that I thought while we're just on images. So they did mention that if you are using images, and most AI image building tools, do flag them as AI created. But you want to make sure that, because what was interesting is I was just judging 2 weeks ago the AI a search awards. I better not say which one. And there was two people that talked about how they were editing in some very interesting ways, that they were modifying, I think that's the word, modifying images for both shopping search and for shopping search for the paid side. And immediately I thought, oh wow, because they said if you don't have those tags, and they gave us, we'll put the screenshot in the notes, if you don't have one of those three tags, that it was synthetic or it was a manipulated is the wrong word, modified or combined or conjoined. There was, anyways, three. I didn't have it in the notes because I didn't think anybody cared, but since you mentioned this, it just popped to mind. So that was a good to hear, to make sure, especially if you're dealing with paid, around the e-commerce search or things where you are putting out images. Similar to your question, if we're creating this, or if it's a dynamic image. And I wonder, I know your use case. I'm trying not to give away the client, but did he answer, or did you ask, if I've got auto-sized images? So with Cloudflare and Akamai, you can have a image. And I know there's other people who have tools that do this, where you load a full-size premium, like super crisp, super high res image. And then you use the code string to tell Cloudflare specifically, is where I'm used to using it.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, I want this to be sized this way. So that rule statement resizes it. Did you happen to ask him about that, if that mattered? Or is that your question when you said, hey, does it have to be on the page? Because these technically aren't on the page, they're sized on demand.
Yeah, but I guess depending on how it's implemented, it would actually be the file, right? So in some cases, those manipulations are part of the file name .jpeg.
Yeah.
In other cases,
Oh,
I've
these are
seen where they're not.
extension. So it's got the .jpeg, and then it's really like almost a parameter that gives the modification. So we've used them when we've had like in a recipe carousel.
Yeah.
You can put three images, and it's designed to give you the standard, the vertical, and the horizontal. And each of those we found, rather than having three actual images, that we would use the dynamic modification functionality in Cloudflare. And that on demand or on request, that image would be basically beat into submission. So I think that's the interesting thing. I think, to your point, if it's in the schema and it does render, obviously, so that's good. And then and we always tried to submit an image XML sitemap that had all of those images that we had in our schema So yeah, that's an interesting thing. But again, that's gold when you can. And I know people walk away frustrated. It's like, damn it, you didn't answer my exact question. But you can extrapolate a more generic or generalized, I think is the word John uses,
Yeah,
for
you
these
have to think like
answers.
an engineer and ask the question as an engineering question because
Exactly.
well they I guess they do, I don't know, is it office hours or something where they
Yeah.
actually answer specific site questions, but you're more likely to get an answer if you can ask a generic question so that, and even John talked about this during the meeting, they can't give preference. Like they can't
Right.
give you information that would help you above someone
Individually.
else.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's what it means by the generalization. He can
Yeah.
answer your question and say, okay, yeah. So for sites that do X, Y, and Z, here's the
Mm-hmm.
outcome. So that's awesome. I mean, that does make it for me. I think the value was the same. I ended up we had dinner with our daughter, and that's always a good reason to go to New York. But yeah, I walked away with about 4 or 5 to me sound bites, and it's like that at a conference. I get a nugget of information and then I can spin
Yeah.
it. As we were talking before we went live, it's like what was interesting is when I sort of did my personal write up and then I looked at some others that were there, what they wrote. It was interesting how I interpreted some things a little bit differently, and we'll talk about a few of those. But yeah, so I mentioned the two big things for me. Well, there was three, but the two were AI all day. Anything you took away from that?
Yeah, same. So they're definitely leading into AI. It's changing so fast. They're not backfilling their systems to report on anything yet. You can't get any information specific to overviews or anything out of Search Console yet. It was interesting to see. I mean, I think everybody might have guessed, but it's interesting to see how they use RAG to update the overviews. So we know that there's some feedback going into the LLM to help get the right answer. But as we both know that the and if you're looking for it to write a generic paragraph, it's great. If you're looking for a specific number, it stinks. If you're looking for
Yeah.
a time, if you're looking for an address, if you're looking for, I just saw a presentation today where they basically asked questions, and I would have never thought of this even coming out of our VP of Answers podcast, but they asked questions like, who is the manager of X company? Who's the purchasing something of X company? Like, 60% wrong.
Right. And to be fair, where would they get that? I mean, that's the whole premise of our answers management program, and our VP of Answers podcast talked about that, is that what are they asking? And I think you gave a great example of that, of asking the sales team, what are people asking you?
Yeah.
And the procurement manager makes sense because we want to get in front of that person. I mean, these are the kind of things you would typically go to LinkedIn for. And so it makes sense. Sort of jumping ahead, one of the big takeaways was it was during the Q&A where one of the women asked sort of a venting slash asking. So venting in that she said, hey, she and a couple of other people had posted some horrific examples from some of their clients, that the address and phone number that was coming up in AI answers. And they said, look, you've got this amazing thing, with the, Google. I still think of it as Google My Business. I'm trying to remember what it's called. The Google,
Business
I'm going to call it
overview.
Google Business Profiles.
Oh, profile.
I'm old school. So it's Google My Business. It's
Yeah.
hard to get rid of the old vocabulary. But so, and this is something I want to talk about a little bit later. My other takeaway is, and I'll just throw it out there. I have more takeaways than I thought I had. This for 1 second. I think too many people think of Google as this highly functional, all encompassing, highly efficient, just Google. Google is a thing, and not understanding that it's a series of systems. And as any of us know, I mean, just go to your web team now and say, hey, can you make a change? And, you've got to fill out a ticket and you've got to justify it. And you got all that nonsense, all that highly valuable actionable things you have to do to have an efficient organization. But that's the thing. So one thing they said is, why can't you, Google, connect to the Google business profile? So I've got a business and somebody wants the phone number, and I've got the phone number in the Google business profile. Why can't you take it from there? And I think this is what you were just talking about, Bill, with, we've got an answer. Where does it come from? How are we vetting it? And I think they had a slide where they were actually showing somebody asked a question. Google is able to both look at their search engine and into their LLM, and then basically sort of massage the two and figure out, and what they're calling is grounding is, an answer with links. And apparently those links tend to be, or should be, could be, I didn't quite get the legally correct word that they used about what they are. Is it the where they actually got that answer from? And I think that was the interesting thing. So I think over time, and Danny said they would take it away and try to figure out, can they, for those type of queries, pull that in from the business profile? Because that makes sense, right? Many businesses, not all, because I know a lot of people can't even get into theirs, but many businesses do edit those. So again, in a Google environment, that makes sense, right?
Yeah.
And I'll give my little rant about the Google systems a little bit later, but I thought that was an interesting thing where people were talking about the quality of what's there, and what are and where do they get those legit answers. And I think that triggered, well, this was later on, but it was sort of almost the catalyst for a number of other questions, and how they were almost damage controlling, if you will, what they anticipated in the questions, with explaining sort of AI and where they're going. And probably the biggest thing that I heard from people collectively was, when can we get the data? When can Search Console or whatever give me how many impressions and clicks? And and that's really what people wanted. And I think it was all summed up with this, the community as a whole wanted to know, is it impacting them or not? And I thought Mike King actually asked a really good question. I didn't quite get the exact statement, but he said, hey, we've got people we have to answer to. And our people, our clients, if we can point to something from Google, from the source, not, Sally, Jim, Bob, Steve pontificating over here, but actually from Google, that, hey, here's a number, here's a direction, here is an output, or whatever it is, then that's good. And, their answer is, well, we'll take it back and see what we can do. But I mean, I think in one hand, it was as little as, just give me how many queries, how many times is it appearing? What is the quality frequency? What is the average click rate? What is something? And let me just give it generalized data. And again, it's hopeful that they said they would consider it. I think the second piece of this was when they tried to explain, and I totally get this, why they can't give us AI answers. And I think first it started with the party line that I think is a true statement. It's complicated. It's also slightly just out of beta, if you will. I mean, there's many markets that don't have it yet. One thing they mentioned was just, the prompt size. I think a couple episodes ago, we talked what the average prompt was 22 words, on in AI. So think about the data side of that. Obviously, they've got it, but can they process it? Can they parse it? They also talked about what did they say? 25% of all queries, and especially now with the AI functionality, had never been seen before. So it was going to be, and I think that was an interesting point they made about, can the data be usable if, let's say, 90% of all of them only have one, meaning one impression, because it was only ever asked once because of the nuancing of prompt. So I totally see their point. I think another interesting thing that was probably the only really condescending point of the whole thing was the question of, what the hell would you do with this? If we gave it to you, what would you do with it?
Yeah.
And that prompted, again, directionality. We want to know definitively X is going here and Y is going here. And that was interesting. Another interesting soundbite which I thought was very clever. Just goes to media training that these folks go through. I think it was Paul Shapiro. I think he's at Uber. He asked about, can they use UTM parameters? Because ChatGPT uses them. So little tracking
The
parameters
referring, yeah,
at the
as the
referring URL.
referring, yeah.
Now, one, we don't get, query data anymore. So it's good, but at least, a UTM parameter. What was interesting is they said okay, not likely, because if they were to do that, it would be giving preference to Google's analytics products, which, primarily uses, or not primarily, but leverages considerably UTM parameters. So I thought that was, sort of okay, yeah, we're going to cop out to our policies and you guys bitching every time we promote something from Google. But it's true, people would say that. And so I think the idea is they seem to take it back because it was so overwhelming, the ask, that we'll see what they ultimately do. But they did at least say, hey, it's hard. It's still a work in progress, but we'll see what we might be able to do.
Yeah. It was, I like the session where they were talking about why data doesn't match.
Yeah.
They were comparing Search Console to Google Trends to GA4. Never given us much thought, but you can customize Google Analytics time. The Search Console is fixed for California, so if you're in Europe, you're getting California time numbers. So good to know for people who are listening from overseas. And then he went into like the differences of Search Console versus Google Trends. Trends is really looking at topics, not the keyword level. So when you see keywords, those are aggregated around the topic using S's and all kinds of different things. That was interesting.
And that they want to try to align it. I thought that was good. And Daniel, who was doing that presentation, used to be part of Google Analytics. And again, sort of in my rant portion of this, that illustrates my point, is even his, and while he was joking to some degree, his phobia of dealing with his former analytics contacts, just really shows that there is disparity between systems. And each system has their own objectives and things like that. I think some things make sense just by the way they collect and what they present. And there is a good chart, which we'll add in the notes, that they showed of the variances and the purpose of what they do and why they do it, which, sort of he alluded to, leading to, that's one of the reasons why we just can't connect them, because some people would think, oh, wow, why can't? And they were asking one question, I think, that they had gotten before everything kicked off was, why can't I tie any of this stuff together exactly? And that's where he referenced, the time zone differences and, the depth of things. And again, they did announce that now in the API, you can pull out the 24-hour piece, which is good. You can now extract it on a 24-hour for people that are using BigQuery to store it at that level. So yeah, but I think that was a good,
and they announced that
really
they're going to come
session.
out with days hourly data.
Yes.
So he thought it might be that day, but he wasn't sure. I haven't heard anything about it. I'm sure it hasn't come out yet. People would be all over that. Let me ask you a question, a practical question. How would you use that data?
The three of them?
No, I mean, how would you use 8 hours of hourly data?
I mean, I would look at
8 days of hourly data.
Yeah, I would just look at over the day. Well, so one way that immediately goes back to our session on combining, making search play nice with everybody else. And I think I did nudge you when he was talking about this and say, okay, we just launched a campaign this morning, on TV or the radio or whatever archaic media. Even if we launched now we could see if we launched it this morning, if we were getting this day, we could start to see it launched, let's say at 9 a.m. on drive time radio or whatever. We could look at potential time, on that first day.
That
was
makes
there an
total
uplift
sense.
of queries, right?
I hadn't thought about that. So you create an event that could trigger something that is instant. And so you would see it 9 o'clock, something happened, 12 o'clock, something happened.
Or same day. I mean, let's keep realistic. I mean, I'm not listening to something immediately, turn and start querying it, but I may. And what we can see is, again, if we were launching a brand new product, this is where I would see it. If I was launching, and we talked about this next generation or fifth generation Prius, what's the word? Phrase, concept. They were rebilling it as the fifth generation Prius. So we were able to find in search the immediate uptick and on what day we could see an uplift in people using that query when we introduced that new word or phrase into their vocabulary. So I would use it the same way. If I was running any net new, especially anything where I'm introducing new concepts, new products, I'd want to see is, not literally how quickly did they start Googling for it. And this also ties back to one of the points that you made. If we're launching something, don't come to us a week later and say, hey, search team, how are we ranking on this? And like, we had no idea that you even launched this. So I think things like that are where we could do it. Anything where we wanted to see maybe a start. Is there a time wave, if you will? Are they doing it more in the morning? Is it a lunchtime thing? I'd be curious to know. We're like right now, I'm not a big basketball fan, but March Madness, is there any correlation in times? Is the game on?
Yeah.
Because I remember I've had people, take me to dinner because of my clients' ads on TV during the game because they didn't remember who that it was, drove a ton of traffic to them because we didn't do a good job of, having content out there that matched the commercial. But yeah, that would be an interesting way that I would look at it using, that time window.
Yeah. So I can see how you could use it now, but I'm thinking that the real benefit here is really feedback for external actions, not because I mean, depending on the time of day you search, it's going to go up and down and up and down and up and down.
Right. Exactly.
Okay.
It's just another level of granularity, and it is what it is.
Yep. Okay.
Anything else on AI?
Well, they shared anecdotally lots of information about the way people search has changed. So, longer search queries, people using different modes, different assets. Oh, did they launch the AI? What was it called? AI search?
Mode?
AI mode at the event?
It's still not public. It's still, you have to opt into it. But
Yeah,
I've been playing with it. And
oh yeah, how is that? I signed up for it. I got a note that I'm in, but I haven't had a chance to test it yet in labs.
I mean, it's okay. It's nothing earth shattering. I've did a variety of queries on it. It didn't impress me.
Okay.
But it's I think it is a notch above. I think it really is going to depend on what you're searching for. Like if you did something like a search I did yesterday I found that it gave me a more detailed response when I wanted to know, help me plan a routing from Malaga, Spain up through, Alhambra into Sevilla and, that type of thing where it was a step 1, step 2, or step 3, and then A versus B type, and again, like everything, it comes down to what you ask it to do. I thought that gave me back, a much better answer than what I was getting, obviously from, this regular Google gives me just a bunch of affiliate sites, and then AI answers really doesn't necessarily answer that question. Again, it says, yes, either way you could go, makes sense. But so in that regard, I think if you ask a complex one that would have multiple if-then scenarios, I thought it was good. I haven't compared it. I wanted to compare it to some of the other tools out there, but I think the one thing that's nice that I took away is the fact that they can fall back into Google, which has, recency data. And so again, that's my bias to continuing to use Google is because they can tap into Google proper and pull out things from, say, yesterday.
Yeah. I was going to say a couple things also came out. Well, most people would know this, but Publishers have control. They can use the robots text to prevent AI from using your content for training. And then the interesting thing Daniel brought up was snippet controls. So you can actually prevent content from appearing in AI generated snippets. And his example was coupon codes. So
Yep.
you want your page to show up, but you don't want the code to show up in the search result. And so you can use snippet controls there.
Yep. Exactly. Yeah. No. So we'll note them again. These are all things that can make things more efficient because obviously you want people to find your site if they're looking for your coupon code, but you don't necessarily want the coupon code to be there because you hope that they'll come to your site and put it in. Again, I'm sort of torn on that. I can see from a user perspective, just give me the damn code. But as a marketer, I can say, okay, come to our site and get it. Especially if you want them, to come to your site and
Yeah.
they can get it on the vetted source as opposed to one of the gazillion coupon code scraper sites that are out there.
And he also said that there was a whole bunch of industry-wide discussions going on about standardization and future considerations, and he encouraged people to participate in the standards
Yep.
discussions.
Yeah, Gary and I forget who else from Google is. I don't know if you remember. I missed the window. I started writing up what my thoughts were because that standards body, the IEEE or something, asked for input from the community for robots text adaptations, modifications, improvements, etc. I know Gary and another Googler submitted it. Then they got to come, I guess, defend or argue it in Ireland recently. And then I just saw that I guess there's another round happening, I think in Singapore, because he mentioned he was either maybe it was John that mentioned that they were going to be at that Singapore, or at least Gary would be at that Singapore event. So Google's very active in this, and I suspect some of the other AI agents are because they're looking at ways to control this. And I think just before this, I was dealing with an issue where, something very semantically, what's the word? It was a simple thing where they didn't include a folder for a market when it was designed to be a wild card, and Google, because it didn't have the market folder in it, it wasn't respected. And they were doing like, a gazillion requests against this content when they were trying to block it. But again, a slightly different interpretation of it allowed them to get in. And it was like a gazillion requests. And again, it was stupid on Google's part to even want this content, but obviously it is what it is. So I think we do need some work on this. I do think we need some logic tools, to where people can actually, even a better tester to say, hey, and I couldn't remember where I saw this tester where I could put in a URL and it would actually test if that actual URL would be blocked or not. So, I mean, these are some interesting things that, again, get my brain working, is that can we test a lot of these variations? Because, and one thing I'm going to put in here, because I don't think it fits anywhere, is when you're using AI for stuff, like I was writing a bunch of schema variations the other day, and I was just sort of being lazy. And I put what I had in and said, hey, can you extrapolate on this and give me these? And it did a great job, but it was putting spacing in. And then in another case, it was using the mixed case. And case is very specific in schema. And so I ask it, it's like, hey, how come you've got all this empty space in here? And then how come you didn't, obviously Google can overlook some of this, but I'm a code perfectionist. And it just said, oh, you're correct. I don't know why I missed
Yeah.
that, but yes, I've went in and revetted. So you assume that and so now I just add that to my prompt. It's like, if you add something, explain it to me like a 5-year-old. If you correct something, explain it like a 5-year-old. And then if you make a change, run it through a validator to make sure that it's coded correctly. And I found that you got to remind it, just like a human. Hey, did you proofread this? Did you spell check it? I did previously. Well, you just edited 14 paragraphs, so you probably need to do it again. That's just sort of a little side note on some things you need to do when you're relying on AI tools. Anything else about the day that you took away?
Nothing really jumps out at me. No, not really. I mean, they went over the typical things with guidelines. New mentions in the quality guidelines for reducing filler content, addressing AI generated content. You brought that up to mark your images as AI. Avoid large scale thin content strategies. Yeah, so I think, for people who think that AI is going to be their savior for building websites, you're just going to be pumping up a whole bunch of generic stuff that's already on the web
Right.
and is not going to be seen as quality. And you're going to have a tough time ranking for that stuff. I want to remind people of our free Facebook group where we use that as an opportunity to discuss these things, and you can ask any questions you want. You could also suggest ideas for upcoming podcasts. You can find that by searching International Web Mastery Free Group.
And they talked about spam. They put up a data point that 50% of all the documents they come across on the web are spam.
Yeah.
And then they gave a couple criteria, that it's malicious stuff, it's legitimate spam. And in this categorization, I think, again, down in the reputation abuse where Danny was talking, I think he made a good point, and we've talked about this. Is what you're producing materially different and of value beyond what Google has? And this is something I've struggled with, I'd say probably my whole career is trying to get people to understand that, hey, your baby might actually be ugly.
Yeah.
That this thing that you've built, what did I see yesterday? I'm like, my God, did we need another one of those? It was, what was it? I don't know if it was a delivery, sir. It was something. I'm like, really? Do we need another one? And somebody put money behind that, probably millions of dollars behind yet another, whatever it was. I blocked it out. It was just one of these things.
Yeah.
It's like,
Yeah.
trying to keep my blood pressure in check. And it's like, but I think that's what Danny was saying is like, and then it's really good if you read that site reputation abuse. He gave the 3 criteria that, if it's third party content that's on there legitimately, I mean, it's a legitimate add-on, not for the purposes of fooling Google and not because you decided you want to go in this other direction. It's sort of like, what was the analogy they gave? It was like somebody, I don't know, Babies R Us magically being about, finance content and 401ks and, and sure, you might be able to spin it. It's good to save for your child's education, but in that context, it makes sense. But if you've got the 14 best CDs to put your money in today, and you say for your child's education, that's not materially different. You're totally, and it's like the ones we've seen where, a major newspaper has a section, for coupons, and it's nothing but coupon codes for everything in the brother. I mean, that is no business being on that site and available to Google. You can have it. Like they said, you can have it. If you think that's part of your business model, go for it. So spam, crawling, those type of things, it's a huge, and if you think about that, and we always tell people, step off your soapbox and stop thinking exclusively about your ecosystem and think about the bigger ecosystem. If 50%, half of what Google's encountering is spam and garbage, they got to figure that out. So if you're not exponentially more relevant and better than others, you may not be getting indexed. And so just think about that. And I think that ties into, the other one we're going to talk about in more context on our next episode is just, they did mention AIO and inaccurate information. And we did talk about this earlier about pulling in the, Google business profiles and stuff. So it was good that Google, acknowledged this and wants to do better. The other big point I took away was, like I said, a lot of, mentions of evolution. They even had, Liz Reed's statement, the search problem is never solved. And we need, to think differently. And then they had 5 points. The one thing I took away from this, and I don't know, I was trying to remember if somebody from Google said this or if it was you and I or somebody we were talking to. One of the things I took away from those 5 points is, Google is a for-profit organization. And like they talk about that, hey, stuff's changing. And that was the word evolve is in every one of these 5 points. We got to deal with spam content. User needs are evolving. The SERP will evolve. And I think that's where we sort of got into this pivot on the SERP. And just sort of, to wrap this up as with the rant that I promised is, John started out with talking about how all the pieces fit together. He had a slide of, there's pages, there's a crawler, there's an indexer, there's the index ranking and serving. This serving thing that doesn't get much attention. Remember when we had the episode where we talked about the search off the record, about the duplication, the dupes team? They referenced those pesky serving team and how, they don't always take what they come up with, because the question is, how is Google serving the wrong version of my page? Now, we as international search people, we love href lang and we hate that Google takes the wrong one. And they talked about maybe we should get the serving team on. This is the big takeaway is all this other stuff goes on, and this is all separate systems and teams.
Yeah.
And Google is just like your company. It's not, when you say Google, it's not this one big, massive orb of efficiency.
Yeah, I mean, I think it would be really good to understand that it's almost exactly like your company, right? There's a mission, there's people who are in different roles, and like the output of your company would be a product. The output of Google would be the search results in the case of search. And there's the guy that has to buy the raw materials, and then somebody has to ship the raw materials to the manufacturer, and then somebody has to receive them. And after they receive them, they have to put them in queue for the making the product, and then somebody has to cut them, and then somebody has to assemble them. It's no different in a search engine.
And exactly that, right? And they all have different goals. And then I love this analogy because the person sourcing the products, right? They're going to probably try to get as inexpensively as possible. And does that open up tolerance faults, that somebody else downstream has to deal with? And that's sort of what these guys have alluded to with this. But coming back to the serving team, right? I think they're the ones responsible for the search results page.
Yeah, they have to take all the crap that everybody can put together for them and figure out how to get the best user experience.
And that's exactly how John phrased it, is they have the job of taking that query and then further interpreting it and then reaching down into the bowels of the Google and pulling out all the bits, A, that answers it, B, that answers it in the right context. Is it best with images? Is it best with maps? Is it best with text? Is it best with an AI answer? Is it best with whatever? And then the hope is that all of those bits, like again, back to your question about what image is being served in the image search. And they talked about all these, there was a whole discussion on the evolution where lens and, circle search and all of these different things, are now operating. And if they're all using faulty materials, and I love this, procurement screwing up the downstream, because I just remember my wife coming home when her first job in the United States was at Brother Typewriter, and people would order parts, and then they'd have a whole group of people that did nothing but make the hole bigger because the tolerance wasn't right. And yeah, it's just, what ingredients went into the sauce. But the other thing these guys have to fight with is Google making money.
Yeah.
I can't even fathom this team of people that are both a dual mission of serving the best thing in the right context, in the right format, and, the KPIs around how do we generate revenue and how do we keep them.
It's no different than every other company.
Than everybody else, right? How do we merchandise this stuff without...
You can make $1 million pen, but you'll never sell it. Won't make money.
I love this. See, this is why it's good. talking like this and then going there because, you know, it's like if you go to your supermarket and they happen to put, you know, their branded products on the end cap instead of Barilla pasta, you
Hmm.
know, how does that look to people? Right.
Right.
And it's the same thing. It's like, look, okay. And then we've got, you know, the people paying to be there and we've got the people that, so it's an interesting thing. I think we should drill down into this type thing. But anyways, I just wanted to sort of say, hey, they're no different than the chaos in your company. And so the more we can figure this out, and the last thing I want to leave people with is follow the money. And if you think about where things are going, because Google did reference, I think rather, is it passively aggressively or cryptically, this statement in the rapid changes impacting behavior patterns, right? And they say users are increasingly turning to closed garden platforms. I love how they've used that. That's the
I missed that.
AOL. So it's in, oh, I didn't grab the slide number, but it's the one that has 1, 2, and 3. So they say there's new platforms, new user preferences, and new technologies. But in the new platforms, they say explicitly users increasingly turn into closed garden platforms for information needs previously met by search engines and resulting in traffic to the open web. So they're basically saying if you go to ChatGPT, you're stuck. You know, Google, we at least to some degree send people out to the public web and we're not a closed garden. When I start hearing those words being integrated into rapid changes and we have to change, it's pretty interesting because that's the words that everybody was using against AOL back in the day when it was the dominant platform. And now
Hmm.
we're using them not as, hey, don't go there because they only see what you want them to see, what they want you to see. And then now they're saying, hey, stay with the Google because, you know, we're open and free and we can pull in anybody's stuff and we don't gate you in. So I just thought that was really interesting that they're using that as a reason of why they're evolving and why search is evolving. And then the third one, you know, item 3 was, you know, solving new technologies and behaviors. And I think this is exactly why I tied it back to the serving team and then their mission of the mix. And I just want to leave people with I think if you've not done it in a while for your business, because I'm working on an episode coming up about what are 3 to 5 efficient things you can do to make your website more effective and more efficient, is looking at the SERP. And like Bill, how you started with the images, like your client wants their images to be in there because for some queries, their images are what show up. And the question is, are your images there? Are they the right image?
Yeah.
And so for each of these modules, if you will, each of the iterations of a search results page, do we have representation? Now, whether we call this sort of omni-channel or whatever name we want to call it, but if you're, you know, do we have the right? Do we have the context? And then are we, and again, it goes back to the whole, you know, answer management program. Are we answering the question in the context that Google thinks or whatever system thinks it needs to be answered? So if you haven't done that in a while, go look at the SERPs and really take time and look at the SERPs. What's being presented for different queries? Are we there? Can we be there? Do we have the resources? And as Bill said earlier, you know, use schema, use XML sitemaps if it's an image play. Make sure the context is understood. Figure out how image search works. Because again, 2 other things there's actually an article we should probably talk about in an episode is, you know, with Liz and I guess they interviewed 21 former Googlers, really trying to play up the Google is evil play, but they were talking about how, you know, the Google wants to be actually a closed garden, if you will, to keep people in and serve Google stuff. But the question is, you know, how do we play in that environment? Because at the end of the day, they're just a collector of stuff. I'm not going to use the P word because, you know, I don't need them chasing me, but, you know, they're essentially leveraging other people's stuff, you know, to present things to you. So I think as we think about that, we need to be mindful of where it's going and how do we benefit and how do we make sure our content's in there. So like I said, it was a good event, a lot of good sound bites. I mean, just talking through this, I've seen 4 or 5 other things I want to dig a little deeper into, but yeah. hopefully this has been interesting, and maybe at some point they filmed it. So maybe they'll put the video out there so you can see.
They'll probably
for
carve it
yourself.
up into the different agenda topics,
Yep.
which, I feel bad now. At the beginning, I said it was like, okay. It really was good. I would never miss it. I would definitely do it again. And if anyone ever has an opportunity to go, you should definitely go. Okay. I think this is a good place to wrap. What do you think?
Perfect. Yeah. No, sounds good.
All right. So, we hope you're finding value in our conversations. If you're enjoying the show, we'd really appreciate it if you would take a moment to rate and review the podcast on your favorite platform. We also want to hear from you. Your feedback helps motivate us to help make these things and plan future episodes. Find us by searching International Web Mastery on LinkedIn, Facebook, and X. And please, we're not just looking for a star. We'd like to get some feedback and know that you're actually listening and getting something out of this. And tell us what you want to hear us to do next.
Sounds good.
Thanks,
See you
Bill.
next time.
Talk to you. Bye.
Yep.
Hey, this is Bill Scully. I just wanted to let you know that we have a free training course called Demystifying hreflang. It includes 6 modules and is over an hour long with a quiz at the end of each module. You can find it at internationalwebmastery.com. Hope to see you there.